Just before midnight on July 22, 1991, two Milwaukee police officers on routine patrol saw a man running down North 25th Street, waving at their car. He was barefoot, scared, breathing hard, and hanging from his left wrist was a single steel handcuff, locked tight, with nothing on the other end. His name was Tracy Edwards. He told officers Robert Roth and Ralph Mueller a story that sounded almost too strange to act on. A quiet, polite man in a nearby apartment had lured him home, snapped the cuff on him, held a knife to his chest, and told him he was going to cut his heart out. Edwards had fought his way to the door and run for his life. The officers could have written it up as a domestic dispute. Instead, they asked him to show them the apartment. That decision ended a killing spree that had lasted 13 years, taken 17 lives, and survived more police contact than almost any case in American history. Because the most disturbing part of this story is not that a serial killer lived quietly at 924 North 25th Street. It is how many times the system stood at his door and walked away. To his neighbors, Jeffrey Dahmer was nobody. 31 years old. A shift worker at a chocolate factory. Soft-spoken, polite, kept to himself. That invisibility was not an accident. It was his camouflage, and it worked for over a decade, from his first murder in Ohio in 1978 through the years he hunted in Milwaukee. But invisible is not the same as unnoticed. The record shows the warnings piling up for years. In 1988, Dahmer was arrested for drugging and molesting a 13-year-old boy. He was convicted. A judge, persuaded by his calm apology, gave him work release and probation instead of serious prison time. The boy he assaulted was a Laotian teenager named Somsak Sinthasumphone. Remember that family name. Neighbors in his building complained, again and again, about the smell coming from apartment 213. Dahmer always had an answer. His freezer broke. His fish died. The complaints went nowhere. His probation officer was assigned to check his home, but the visits were waived. Nobody looked in the bedroom. Nobody opened the drawer. And then came the night of May 27, 1991, the failure that still defines this case. Around 2 in the morning, two teenage girls found a naked, injured boy sitting on the corner of 25th and State. He could barely stand. He was 14 years old, and his name was Contemporaneous Sinthasumphone. The younger brother of the boy Dahmer had been convicted of assaulting 3 years earlier. The girls called 911. Officers arrived. So did Dahmer, calm as ever, explaining that the boy was his adult boyfriend, that he was just drunk, that this happened sometimes. The girls protested. They had seen the boy's condition up close, and they refused to leave. The officers dismissed them. In the days that followed, a neighbor named Glenda Cleveland called the police again and again with one simple question. How old is that boy? Are you sure he's an adult? Her niece and daughter were the ones who had found him. She even called the FBI. On one recorded call, an officer assured her the situation was handled, that it was a domestic matter between adults. It was not. There was a 14-year-old's name, already in Milwaukee police files, connected to the same address and the same man, one records check away. Nobody ran it. The officers took the killer's word over the witnesses. They walked Contemporaneous back into apartment 213, glanced around, saw nothing alarming, and left. Dahmer killed him that night. One of the officers, on the radio afterward, joked about it. That is what Tracy Edwards was up against 2 months later. A killer the system had already decided not to see. Which is why what happened on July 22 matters so much. Edwards was inside apartment 213 for hours. He watched Dahmer's mood swing between friendly and vacant. He saw the knife. He felt the handcuff close on his wrist. And instead of freezing, he kept talking, kept Dahmer calm, waited for one unguarded second, and then hit him and ran. He did not just escape. He brought the police back. At the apartment door, Dahmer was calm again, apologetic, ready with another story. He'd lost his job. He'd been drinking. The handcuffs were nothing. He offered to get the key from the bedroom. One of the officers went instead. And in that bedroom, Officer Ralph Mueller pulled open the top drawer of the dresser, looking for a handcuff key, and found photographs. Dozens of Polaroids. What they showed left no room for explanation, and Mueller's words to his partner have entered criminal justice history. These are for real. Dahmer stopped being calm. The officers wrestled him to the floor of the same apartment the police had walked out of 8 weeks earlier. Then came the search and the quiet horror of the inventory. Investigators documented remains of 11 victims inside that one-bedroom apartment. The scene was so far beyond anything Milwaukee homicide had processed that the medical examiner's team worked it like an archaeological dig, cataloging, photographing, mapping the entire apartment before anything moved. Every complaint about the smell, every story about a broken freezer, now read very differently. In the days that followed, something unusual happened in an interrogation room. Dahmer waived his right to a lawyer's silence and began to talk, and he did not stop for weeks. Sitting with Detective Patrick Kennedy, hour after hour, day after day, he walked through 17 murders across 13 years, from Ohio in 1978 to Milwaukee in 1991, in flat, precise detail, cases the police had never even connected to one another. Detectives checked every claim against missing person files, dental records, and the photographs from the drawer. The confession held. Cold cases across 2 states began to close, one name at a time, because the man who had hidden everything suddenly seemed to want the record complete. The confession laid bare how he had chosen his victims, young men, most of them Black, Asian, or Latino, many from poor neighborhoods, people whose disappearances drew less attention and less urgency. That was not bad luck. It was strategy. He understood whose missing person reports got worked hard and whose didn't. The trial opened in January 1992, and it turned on a single question. Not whether Dahmer had killed, he admitted everything, but whether he was legally insane. For 2 weeks, experts argued about the line between evil and illness. The jury's answer came on February 15, 1992, sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. 2 days later, a judge sentenced him to 15 consecutive life terms, more than 900 years. There is no parole in that arithmetic. He served less than 3 of those years. In November 1994, another inmate killed him at Columbia Correctional Institution. The aftermath reached further than the verdict. The 2 officers who had returned Conorak's synthesophone to apartment 213 were fired. Glenda Cleveland, the neighbor whose calls had been brushed aside, was publicly honored for doing everything a citizen could do, while the system did nothing. The Milwaukee Police Department spent years rebuilding trust with the communities Dahmer had preyed on, communities that had been telling the truth all along. And Tracy Edwards, the man who ran into the street with a handcuff on his wrist, is the reason the number stopped at 17. The building itself did not survive the case. The Oxford Apartments stood barely another year. In 1992, the city tore the whole structure down, and the lot on North 25th Street has stayed empty ever since, a block-long blank space in the middle of the neighborhood, because no one could imagine living where apartment 213 had been. So how was one of America's most notorious serial killers finally caught? Not by a profile, not by a task force, not by forensic breakthrough. He was caught because one intended victim refused to die, because 2 patrol officers took a strange story seriously enough to knock on a door, and because a drawer full of photographs said what every ignored complaint, every dismissed 911 call, and every waived home visit had been trying to say for years. The evidence was always there. Someone finally looked. If you want more real cases broken down this way, how investigators work, and how they sometimes fail, the channel is full of them. Subscribe for the next documentary.